It's been a while since Queen Elizabeth II passed away, but those who miss her will never stop missing her. If you're one of those people, you might appreciate having a way to relive her reign. While there are many shows and movies out there about the Queen, the Crown stands head and shoulders over most of them. This video will be an 8-episode guide that takes you through the Queen's life. We'll begin, of course, with the episode that sees her taking the throne in the first place. Titled Windsor, the first season's 3rd episode flashes through all the events that led to Princess Elizabeth of York ascending to the top spot at Buckingham Palace. Believe it or not, Elizabeth wasn't born into the royal line. However, the first stone leading to her donning the crown was cast by King Edward VII. In the episode, Ed makes the shocking decision of abdicating the throne so he can marry his beloved Wallis Simpson. He tells the British public that he's glad his move will pass the throne on to his brother George, who has a lovely family and a peaceful household. King George VI ruled the kingdom for just 15 years, though they were some of the most tumultuous 15 years of British history. He survived the Second World War but developed cancer from his smoking habit. The father of Elizabeth passed away in 1952, leading the 25-year-old princess to inherit the empire where the sun never sets. Now, when you become king or queen, you gotta have a coronation. Much like what we've seen with King Charles now, Elizabeth officially became Queen of England as soon as her father passed away. But out of respect for the deceased king, her coronation was pushed off to June 1953. That coronation is the subject of the show's 5th ever episode, Smoke and Mirrors. The planning for the coronation was led by the Prince Consort Philip. His goal for the coronation is to reflect that Britain now has a modern queen and monarchy, so that's where Charles got it. Anyway, this coronation is the first in British history to be broadcast on TV, and as the Queen tells us in Season 5, millions of Britons bought their first TV sets just to watch it. This wasn't a coronation without drama. Edward, who left after his abdication, returned to the country and the family who now hate him. Beyond that, Prince Philip has to kneel before his wife, the Queen. He isn't happy about it because it's the 1950s, and he's in full patriarchal mode. Despite all that, Elizabeth is eventually crowned queen. Before we move on from Season 1, there's one more defining episode. The 9th episode, Assassins, sets the tone for Queen Elizabeth's reign as it unfolds over the next several decades. We see Elizabeth dealing with marital conflicts as her first challenge as queen is happening right at home. You see, Philip didn't have much of a kingly demeanor, and he's more than happy to fritter away his time drunkenly. She needs to find a way to make peace with the fact that Queen Elizabeth has closed the door on leaving him. Her friendship with Lord Porchester complicates that matter, or as she calls him, Porchy. There were rumors that she was in love with him, but the show makes it clear that they are just friends. Elizabeth has always been committed to duty and realizes that being Philip's wife is part of her role as queen. The episode also marks John Lithgow's final appearance as Winston Churchill. In this episode, he has his last meeting with Elizabeth, and the show contrasts his hard and forceful approach to matters with her more compassionate takes on situations. With the end of the Queen's relationship with her first Prime Minister, we're set to compare her relationships with future Prime Ministers against the legendary Churchill. Moving on, let's take a big leap across the 2nd season to land in its 5th season. The House of Windsor rules over the entire domain of the United Kingdom, but they're also a rich and posh family that hasn't experienced the rough and tumble life of their blue-collar subjects. This episode, titled Marionettes, becomes a bit of a problem for the new Queen, as she comes off as being out of touch with some of the people in her domain. Elizabeth shows off the extent of her lack of perspective during a speech she gives to workers at a Jaguar factory in 1956, 3 years into her reign. She fumbles the bag hard by calling these workers average and talking about searching for meaning in their monotonous lives. Journalist Lord Entrencham is one of the loudest voices to call her out, but there's an overall disturbance in the British public over how she spoke to her people just there. This critical moment showed the royals that, as part of modernizing themselves, they needed to spend more time with people from all walks of life to truly appreciate the things everyone was going through. Now, once you're done there, click the next episode button to proceed to Vergangenheit. History books will tell you about the world's mistakes in dealing with the Nazi government of Adolf Hitler. Indeed, some critical political miscalculations were made by the European nations that would become the Allied forces. And who was in charge of Britain before the war? Our former romantic king, Edward. The Duke of Windsor returned to the country around Elizabeth's coronation. Since Elizabeth never really related to Queen Mary's hatred of him, she allowed him to stay. This becomes a problem when documents hit the airwaves revealing that Edward had a working relationship with the Nazis. He may not have sympathized with them, but he was more than willing to play ball with Hitler and the gang for his gain. He continued to do so even after he abdicated the throne, even as Britain was fighting against them. This causes Elizabeth to lose all sympathy for the great romantic. After giving him a pretty big piece of her mind, she banishes him from the family once and for all. At least as far as the show is concerned, we never hear from him again. Coming up, let's talk about episode 8 from the 2nd season. An essential part of the royal family's duties is meeting foreign heads of state. We see Queen Elizabeth do precisely that in Dear Mrs. Kennedy, hosting John F. Kennedy and his wife Jackie in Buckingham Palace. The Kennedys charmed the British royals as much as they charmed the American people. Elizabeth is particularly jealous of Jackie's outfits and the fact that Philip is clearly into her. Things get worse as Jackie criticizes the palace and the Queen herself, which doesn't help Elizabeth's insecurities all that much. Another head of state meeting takes place in Ghana. The Queen went over there to stop the country from leaving the Commonwealth after becoming independent, giving us the iconic moment of her dancing with President Kwame Nkrumah. Overall, that went a lot better than their encounter with the Kennedys. Next, we'll proceed to Season 3, Episode 3. This episode is titled Aberfan, and you can imagine what this episode is about. In 1966, the episode centered on the landslide in the Welsh town of that name that ended up killing over 140 people. It was a big shock to the United Kingdom, and it was a shock to Queen Elizabeth too. This was her first time dealing with a domestic natural disaster, and she took her time figuring out what to do. Too much time, as it turns out. The Queen only visits Aberfan 8 days after the landslide, which pisses off the British people. As far as the episode goes, it portrays the Queen as being confused about balancing the steadiness required to rule with the emotions she wants to express. In the grand scheme of things, it's considered an early mistake in the Queen's reign. In real life, Elizabeth considered this the biggest mistake she ever made as Queen. Our guide today will end in Season 4 with its 4th episode. As the Queen's children entered the picture, the focus shifted from the one wearing the crown to the kids who would inherit the crown. But the 4th season still has one episode that places Elizabeth in the spotlight, called Favorites. Early on, Prime Minister and Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher confides in the Queen that she has a favorite among her children. This prompts Elizabeth to wonder if she has a choice too. The show tells us many reasons Elizabeth might not like her kids, but it never conclusively states who might be her favorite. However, the episode does take the opportunity to take shots at Prince Andrew, the most scandalous of her children. Even Elizabeth agrees she's raised a real headache. That's it for today's video. What are your favorite episodes of The Crown from its 5 seasons? And for that matter, drop your recommendations for shows and movies about Queen Elizabeth in the comments section below. But whatever you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.